right, well, I'm just going to get started, and I have quite a bit to say, and I am super excited about this. A couple of things. Number one, this is a seminar, so that means Spark Learning seminars are interactive, and you have been given a bulletin. If you did not, I'm sure there's more in the back there, and we would love for you to take some notes there. We'll reference that on the back. And at the very end of the seminar, at the end of the presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions. And you can text those questions to Danielle at her cell phone number, which is right up there, and she'll collect those and have those ready for us at the end. And then we'll also have them live. A couple of preliminary notes that I wanted to share. One of the quotes that you'll hear Danielle and I say frequently, and I do this in the classes that I teach, this is from a theologian named N.T. Wright, about 1/3 of what I'm going to share with you is wrong. The problem is I don't know which 1/3 it is. And the reason why we say that is because it's to start anything with a sense of humility and a sense of openness and a sense of you all are involved in all sorts of amazing technological enterprises here in Silicon Valley. We have people in our church that are at Google and IBM and Apple and all doing all sorts of amazing things. And there's always constant innovations. And so as we present, I'm going to do my best to present to you the very best that I have come to understand to date. But we recognize that I hold all of that in deep humility, that there's more to learn, that there's a lot more to discover. And so I just want to make sure that I said that at the very outset. We're also hoping that tonight is not the answer to all of the questions regarding faith and technology. We hope really it is a spark to spark conversations and new things. So hopefully something stirs and it gets you thinking and conversing and questioning about things that maybe you've never thought about before. So it's not the end, it's just the beginning. So just some preliminary notes there. And my job in the first portion of my presentation is to answer three main questions. Number one, why this seminar? Number two, what is technology? And number three, what are its effects? So those are the three questions that I want to address with you. Are you ready to have some fun? This is going to be fun. I am a little bit of a self-proclaimed geek, or an amateur one at that. So we're going to have some fun because I think learning is a lot of fun. So number one, why this seminar? Well, first and foremost, there's some amazing things going on in the world. I just thought we'd start with a little levity. Has anybody ever heard of Like a Hug? It's a new technology developed at MIT, which is a wearable jacket connected to the internet so that somebody, when they go on the internet and clicks like on your page, the jacket inflates and gives you a hug. If you then hug the jacket back, it goes online and likes that person's reply to you. So this is just one example of some of the crazy things that are going on. I thought, I really want this. This would be a lot of fun because can you imagine, a bunch of people liking and then all of a sudden, and you feel. So there's a sense that technology is doing some fun things and amazing things. But then there's a sense that technology is really advancing in ways that we have never even thought about or dreamed about, or in ways in which we only saw in cartoons. Anybody remember the Jetsons? And what's going on now seems to be eerily close to what we used to watch in science fiction, to what we used to see in movies, to what we used to only dream about when we talked about superheroes or the future or things that were going to happen. And Asimov is rapidly developing this robot artificial intelligence where he's doing all sorts of amazing things and he's showing off, and things are advancing very, very quickly. There's also great advancements in technology that are helping us to become better or more efficient, like an exoskeleton that can allow you to carry 70 pounds of gear with very, very little effort. There's some technologies that are pushing the limits and the boundaries of this world and this existence. This is an illustration of a mock-up of an airplane or an aircraft that DARPA has been working on that flies at Mach 20. That's 20 times the speed of sound. Now, the speed of sound is 768 miles an hour multiplied by 20. My understanding is that if you considered New York to Los Angeles, this aircraft could get you there in 11 minutes. That's how fast this aircraft. So now it's not a successful technology yet. You know, you don't really want to get in this thing. But it's things that are actually happening. And then just a few weeks ago, as we were preparing for this seminar, I actually saw Sergey Brin in Target with his Google glasses on, with his, I'm presuming, son, doing this on the side of his glasses. I don't know what. I really kind of regret. I felt like, well, I don't want to bother him, but now I kind of wish I had gotten a picture so I could prove it to you that I actually saw him in Target. But Google glasses have now hit the market, and I actually have seen these. When I was in Costco, I saw somebody wearing Google glasses. And you can take videos and talk and chat, and there's been all sorts of amazing demonstrations that the technology is just continually going. Technology is also doing some amazing things to us regarding medical advancements and making this world a better place. For example, this woman who had a stroke 15 years ago is now, through implanting microelectrodes in her brain, she's able to move a robotic arm just by thinking about it. So telekinesis, the idea that you can move physical objects with your mind, is taking place. And if you want a funny story, ask Danielle about telekinesis. Because I came home one day after reading a book and told her about a telekinetic monkey, and she didn't believe me. But anyway, it's true. There are all sorts of amazing things. So people who are paralyzed are now able to walk. People who have limbs that are missing, rather than putting prosthetics, 3D printing is now moving to a place where you can actually print biological body parts to be sewn back onto your body, and then they're made out of actual living cells that fully adhere to who you are, so it becomes a part of you. So something that was printed actually becomes your biology. And then technology is, of course, doing some amazing things by helping various populations with disabilities or learning differences, and it is creating all sorts of wonderful possibilities for people who aren't able or capable to interact with the world in kind of the normal functional ways that we might think about, but is opening up all sorts of amazing possibilities. Technology is also pushing us to really consider, and this is why we're doing this seminar, what is human? What does it mean to be human? The engineer who created this, by the way, this is the robot, just in case you're wondering. This is Geminoid F, who is a lifelike android with artificial intelligence, has speech, hearing, all that kind of recognition. And when watching this particular video and this engineer, he was asking the question, I want to develop artificial intelligence and I want to develop robots and androids because I want to know what it means to be human. And the replication of humanity in our technology, I think, is awakening us to all sorts of things and insights and perspectives that were never possible before. It's also awakening us to some of perhaps the more nefarious or questionable activities. This is a video game for the Nintendo DS called Love Plus. If you haven't heard of Love Plus, it's one of the best-selling Nintendo games in Japan. It's basically a artificial intelligence kind of game where you get to create your own girlfriend, and your girlfriend interacts with you via the internet and texts you messages throughout the day. And when reading articles on this, you kind of have this, I don't know about you, but sometimes there's this visceral reaction like, that's just weird. My girlfriend is my, game unit. But when talking about, when they had to do downloads and upgrades to this video game system, people reported having emotional responses to the connections that they were making with their technology, very similar to the emotional connections that they made to their pets. And so technology is this weird thing where it's not just a device anymore, or it's not just a thing, it's actually connecting with us in very, very odd and mysterious ways. What does that tell us about who we are, and what does that illuminate for us as humanity, and what kind of questions does that raise for spirituality? I mean, this is why I'm geeked out about this subject, really thrilled that we're going to have conversation, and hopefully for you in this room, you're now hopefully going to expand this and ask some bigger questions about what's really going on. The other reason why this seminar is taking place and why this is important is because all throughout biblical history, from the very, very beginning, we've been utilizing technology. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought of the fig leaves as technology, but we're going to talk about how clothing is a technology. And technology has influenced the biblical story if you think about it over and over and over again. Noah's Ark, the ability to build a piece of equipment that could save all of humanity. The Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11 specifically states that these people had things called baked bricks. Now, why is that important? Because that's a development of a technology in that day that did not exist before. And so what's happening even in the biblical narrative is you start to see people develop these technologies, and it's influencing the biblical story and the spiritual stories that are told. Here's a picture of some of those baked bricks from a place called Tel Dan. What about David and Goliath, if you remember that story? The Philistines had the iron and the armor and all of that, but the Israelites didn't, which is why David has a sling and a stone. In other words, the Philistines had advancements in technology, and the Israelites didn't. So this story is not just about a young boy and a young shepherd who killed a giant, although it is that. But it's also, and perhaps an expression of how technology influences how human relations happen. The tabernacle in the desert from Exodus, crucifixion by the Romans, as well as the Romans' road, or the Romans' road, the roads that the Romans built. All of these are technologies that greatly influence how faith and Christianity and the message in the gospel moves forward in life. And then one of the greatest developments, writing and literacy. And how faith, or the idea, the interaction of God between God and man, is now taking form and taking shape in things that are written down, things that take the form of alphabets and letters and books and scrolls. So all this is technology that influences and affects what spirituality is. And then, of course, at the culmination of all this, technology continues that trend, so that the things that have been happening since the very, very beginning are continuing to happen now, and they're taking new forms, new shapes. And the question is, does that mean something? Does that change what's going on spiritually? Does that illuminate something about who we are? So those are the questions that we want to address. The other reason why this seminar is happening is because I get a sense sometimes when I talk to people about technology and about robots, about telekinetic monkeys, about all sorts of crazy things, digital things that are being implanted in our skin. There's sometimes this initial response or reaction that it's scary, it's freaky, it's unknown, it's this territory that we're not certain about. And so sometimes the most visceral response is to hate the technology or to demonize it or to say, it's really, that's Nicole back there, it's really bad, we should avoid it, let's stay away from all those things. The other thing that I see is people bowing down and worshiping it. Like, I don't know, and I respect you if you did this, but I have no context for why I should stand in line for the iPhone. I just don't understand that at all. I'm just like, oh, wait, it's fine. I'm going to be at home. It's the same phone kind of a deal. But the idolization and the worship almost of technology also happens in our culture. I think those things illuminate for us something about what humanity is, and maybe we should learn from that. Okay, last couple things for why this seminar. One of the biggest challenges for those of you who are of the Christian tradition, for those of you who have a faith tradition in the church, we have wrestled with for many, many years this idea of Christianity or Christ and culture, and how are we to deal with that? Well, we are in a continual debate and discussion as to how should we think about things like gender and sexuality, origins narratives, economics and poverty. So some of the big social questions that are going on, and we're starting to see shifts and trends in our culture that are happening. And we sometimes look at that and decry it and say, that's why our culture is quote unquote going to hell, or that's why, we must kind of forage up and we must kind of protect what it is that we know and believe. I am persuaded that understanding what technology is and what it does to us may help to illuminate why these things are happening in our culture and what's really going on. Now, at this particular point, I want to say I'm not making any value judgments yet on whether technology is good or bad, and that's something that's a discussion that hopefully will take place. What I'm simply saying at this particular point is technology and its ubiquity is probably more influential to us than we realize or that we recognize and that we understand. And part of dealing with faith and technology is first understanding. Seek first to understand, not just to yell or decry and those kinds of things. Quote from Shane Hips, to perceive media and technology with both eyes open, we cannot simply list the various benefits and liabilities of all new and existing media in hopes of understanding their power and meaning. Instead, the task before us requires an entirely different approach to analyzing media, recognizing them not simply as conduits or pipelines, but rather as dynamic forces with power to shape us regardless of content. That's important. Sometimes we think, well, the Bible is on the Kindle or on the iPhone. Regardless of what the content is, the fact that it's in that carrier, that's what he's saying. Such an approach invites us to ask different questions, better questions, and moves us beyond the oversimplified but common belief that media forms can be deemed good or bad based on how they are used, which is sometimes how we see and evaluate technology. This perspective is deeply entrenched in the assumption that a medium can be considered redeemable if it dispenses the gospel or educational information, but evil if it distributes sex and violence. So some people categorize the entire internet as evil just simply because there's a purveyance of all sorts of bad things. However, it is imperative that we move beyond this paradigm and realize our forms of media and technology are primarily forces that cause changes in our philosophy, technology, culture, and ultimately the way we do church. The technologies that are happening are changing us and changing us in amazing ways. So that's why we're doing this. And let's get in there and wrestle, engage, question, discover, understand, pursue, and be humble, thoughtful. And as I mentioned, this is only the very, very beginning. Are you okay so far? What is technology? Well, let's go to Wikipedia. The word technology refers to the making, modification, usage, and knowledge of tools, machines, techniques, crafts, systems, and methods of organization in order to solve a problem, improve a pre-existing solution to a problem, achieve a goal, handle an implied input-output relation, or perform a specific function. Now, what's important about this is because I heard one person define technology as anything invented after you were born. It's the perspective that any technology is something that's recent, that's new to me. But we must expand that definition to understand this. Technology is actually all sorts of things around us. The chairs you're sitting in is a technology. The clothes you're wearing is a technology. The glasses you're wearing is a technology. The hairspray that you used this morning is a technology. The makeup that you put on is a technology. Your refrigerator at home is a technology. And also systems. How many of you went to school? That's a technology. How many of you took management courses? That's a technology. All of these things, systems as well as devices, are what we call technologies. We get it confused in our head that anything electronic or a device is a technology, but it is our proposal and suggestion that anything that is a system, a technique, a method of organization, or a tool is a technology. So technology is a much broader definition than just the digital things that we buy at the local digital store. The fact that you're in a car, roads, systems, governments, all of that are technologies. So let's flesh this out a little bit. There are two possible categories for understanding what technology is. The first is a hard technology, and the second is a soft technology. Hard technologies are things that we would probably most easily understand as a technology. Anything like a hammer, paper, telescopes, stethoscopes, vehicles, computers, clothes. Those are things, physical things that we would call hard technologies. They are things that we hold, things that we use. Those would probably be the tools in our lives. However, there are other things called soft technologies. Soft technologies are, again, the systems or the way in which we manage information or organize ourselves. Have you ever thought about language as a technology? As a way of organizing thoughts, ideas, communication. Information is a technology. The laws that we have are technologies. Did you ever think about the clock or timekeeping or the calendar as a technology, the way we systematize and organize our lives? IQ tests are technologies. Does that, and we'll get to that, does that really communicate what it is and how intelligent we really are? Or is it a technology that we use, and is there something more dynamic going on there? Grades. For anybody who's ever gotten an F I see some hands. I see that hand in the back. Bless you, bless you. If you've ever gotten a grade, that is actually a technology. And it influences us and changes us. Cities are technology. So clocks would be the hard technology. Timekeeping would be the soft. Hard technology would be the actual money, the coins, the dollar bills that you hold. And currency, the idea that there's monetary exchange, would be the soft technology. School, the function, the system, the building of the people, the administration, the desks, the pencils, all that would be the hard technology. But education, the idea that we are to pass on information to other people, would be considered the soft technologies. So understanding what technologies are, seeing these things, are very, very simple to understand, that we've had these technologies for a long, long time. I was thinking of putting up ancient technologies, and I threw the cassette tape in there just for fun. As an ancient technology. So we've had technology with us for a very, very long time. Potted oil lamps, Galileo's telescope. This is an ancient computer that some scholars think is one of the very first analog computers. It's called the Antikythera mechanism, found in Greece. They think it dates somewhere to the 80 BC in Greece. And it calculates stars and the rotation of the earth and all sorts of amazing things in extreme precision. So we've had these technologies for a long time. But then again, have you ever thought of other things like cities, the clothes that you're wearing, money? The fact that houses and how we build is also a technology, how we organize and structure ourselves. And then the things that are most difficult for us to understand as technologies are things like IQ tests. The Constitution of the United States is a technology. It's a way of systematizing and organizing our lives. Language is a technology, and the grading systems that we have are also technologies. All of these things are technologies. Are you okay so far? I got to check out. This is kind of like fire hose kind of time. So what is it? What are all these things? Fundamentally, if you read the literature, it kind of boils down, and this is perhaps a gross oversimplification. So there's more to understand and there's more to learn here. But fundamentally, what most people would say is that technology is really an extension of ourselves. Now, if you understand this one main point, it can get really crazy and really brilliant all at the same time. What are binoculars except an extension of our eyes? We have eyes. Our biology allows us to see, but binoculars or telescopes or glasses extend those parts of our bodies so that we can do greater things with that part. But it's ultimately an extension of the idea or the possibility of seeing. What is a hammer except an extension of our arm or our hand as our physical part? What is a wheel except an extension of our legs? We use our legs to transport ourselves, to mobilize ourselves. And then what do? We develop technologies that take our physical, biological selves and extend them into the physical world in greater ways. Your car, in some ways, is one large extension of your legs. Are you tracking so far? What is the internet and electronics except an extension of your nervous system? Have you ever thought about the ways in which your whole body communicates through the nervous system? And what have we done? We've just created an internet, an interweb, all sorts of wires and connections and synapses that are really extensions of who we are out into this world. What are clothes except an extension of our skin? Skin is there to protect us, to identify us, to encapsulate us, but clothes, an extension. I read one person who said that the cooking pot is an extension of our stomach. We use our stomach to digest food. We use our stomach to process nutrients in order to give us nourishment. And what do? We take that and we extend that out into a cooking pot. And we cook it down so that we can digest even further. What is a fork? And this is what's so fun. What is a fork except an extension of our hands or our fingers? And the reason why this is so important is because this is where it starts to get fun. I have been given 4 of these in my life. What is this? It's an extension fork. Now, this is what's fascinating about this. What does this tell you about me? So here's a perfect example of how an extension of ourselves actually communicates something about us. I don't need to tell you that I like to eat and steal other people's food. All you need to see is that I've been given 4 of these, and it tells you something about who I am. Here's number 2. So now I can be doubly armed. But what is a fork except an extension of ourselves? So then the last question, and the most important question, is what is a lazy boy? It's just an extension of, okay, we'll move on. And then I would suggest to you that constitution grades and language are extensions of the ways we think and the ways we process and the ways we organize. So we think and organize and process information internally through our brains and through our thinking, and we externalize that and we export that into different forms and systems and ways of thinking and processing about the world. Now, what's challenging and what's fascinating is we are starting to become awakened to this reality that these technologies are extensions of us, because these things that have come down the pike now are starting to move these extensions in a rapid and extreme pace. Technology, I mean, if you take a look at some graphs and the ways people think and process about this, the advancements in technology are just increasing in amazing folds. And so the reason why this is so important to have a conversation like this is because all these things, these digital devices that we take for granted almost every day, are now accelerating all of these extensions. And we're starting to see more and more and more of who we are in these things. I work at a high school and a junior high, and when students don't like something on Facebook, they feel viscerally offended. This Facebook, this thing that is out there, this technology is actually an extension of their soul, their spirit, their emotions in some ways. And so how people interact on that particular piece is some ways an extension of their perceptions or their friendships or their connections. So we must understand fundamentally that technology fundamentally is actually us. When we look at technology and we consider it and we ponder it and we think about it in these kinds of ways, they are in many ways reflections of who we are. They are extensions of who we are. So if that's the case, and I know I've kind of given you a whole bunch, if that's the case, that technology is an extension of who we are, it's somehow an expression of our humanity in this physical world, then it's not surprising then that advancements in technology are going to start actually looking like us, because that would be the natural course. So what is technology? Technology is ultimately an extension of us, and technology, studying it, understanding it, can actually be a reflection of who we are. We can understand. And as we study this, we start to recognize that the distinction between us and the technology is actually very, very thin. Because they're extensions, because they're connections, because they are us, they are a part of us, that the distinction between us and the technology is very thin. Which means how we relate, how we use, and how we think about technology, and this is what excites me, actually illuminates who we are and can give us insights into that. Many of you know the story of Narcissus. Narcissus actually, fascinatingly, comes from the Greek word narke, where we get the word narcolepsy. Narcissus' name might mean to sleep or have some connection to sleep. And we know the story of this mythical god as somebody who falls in love with his image and then ultimately drowns because he fell in love with his image. So we consider people who are narcissists to be people who are in love with themselves. But the key distinction in this story that is not very well known, and I don't hear talked about much, it's not so much that Narcissus fell in love with himself, because we all love ourselves, don't we? It's that he failed to recognize that it was him in the reflection. And that story, that little twist right there, might give us some insight for how to deal with technology. Is it possible that as we love our technologies, as we sacrifice and we give up our time, money, energy, effort, sometimes our families and our relationships in order to have and acquire and own and use these technologies? Maybe, just maybe, it's a reflection of our self-love. And maybe, just maybe, we're failing to recognize that it's us in those things that we are having. Are you still okay? Less yeses on that. So last, and then I'm going to turn it over to my friends. What are the effects of technology? This is where it gets really, really tricky, and this is where it gets a little bit controversial. Some people agree, some people disagree, and this is where discussions will hopefully begin. Let me give you 4 examples. I think I have 4, maybe 3. The stethoscope was invented in order to see the chest. It comes from the Greek word to see the chest. What is the stethoscope, except perhaps an extension of our ears and our perceptions? But what happened in the technology development, in an effort to do medicine better, sociologists and technologists who study this will suggest to you that while it perhaps allowed us to perceive the heart rate and breathing better, and it does do that, it also subtly shifts something else in us that you don't recognize and that you are unaware of. So, some people suggest that when you use a technology like a stethoscope, you move from medicine being a very personal enterprise to being a mechanical one. You move from wanting to help the patient to now wanting to treat the disease. The effect, therefore, is when a technology is introduced, you have now systems, bureaucracies, courts, insurance, all sorts of things that are developed in order to sustain this subtle shift in the way people do medicine. And for anybody, and again, this is why I think this is fascinating, for anybody that's ever struggled with insurance and health and all that kind of stuff, this might be helpful for understanding that the technology itself that we've used to help us become better doctors and to help us to become better at medicine are actually shifting subtly what medicine actually is. Remember, technology is not just a device. It changes our worldview, it changes our perspective, it changes our thinking, and it does so without ever asking to let itself be known. Here's one of the quotes. The stethoscope helped to create the objective physician who could move away from involvement with the patient's experiences and sensations to a more detached relation, less with the patient but more with the sounds from within the body. Undistracted by the motives and beliefs of the patient, the auscultator, if I'm saying that correctly, could make a diagnosis from sounds that he alone heard emanating from body organs, sounds that he believed to be objective, bias-free representations of the disease process. The technology itself, in an effort for us to extend who we are, to become better at what we do, actually shifts our attentions of what we're trying to do. It shifts the thinking around it. I'll give you another example really quickly. A clock. What is a clock? But perhaps an extension of our heartbeat, which is what some people may perhaps say, an extension of our perception of the sun, moon, stars, and all those kinds of things. But the clock, once it was developed, in order for us to understand time, actually then enslaved us to the time. Does anybody sense that? So originally, because of theological and religious reasons, the clock was invented to ensure that you devoted yourself consistently and at appropriate times of the day. But what happened is the very clock itself, the invention of the technology comes into our culture, and we shift from then devotion, now we're shifting to chronology. And some people are going to suggest that it was the clock, not business, that developed things like management, efficiency, productivity, industrialization, and ultimately anxiety. The technology did that. We didn't just create business and then needed tools to help us do, and this is where it gets controversial. The tools themselves, the technologies themselves created our world. They start in one place, but then they lead us down a completely different path. Neil Postman, in his book Technopoly, writes, in short, without the clock, capitalism would have been quite impossible. The paradox, the surprise, and the wonder are that the clock was invented by men who wanted to devote themselves more rigorously to God. It ended as the technology of greatest use to men who wished to devote themselves to the accumulation of money. In the eternal struggle between God and man, the clock quite unpredictably favored the latter. The technology did this to us. Language. What is language? Perhaps an extension of our thoughts, an extension and an expansion of our memories. And what's fascinating as you study language is that language is actually really a reflection of how we think and pursue the world. If you take a look at how language has developed and literacy has developed, you have all sorts of connections like an ox head or a house or a snake. All of these letters actually in the Hebrew these letters begin with the actual words to the modern Hebrew, even to these day. So Aleph for A or A is from an ox, or means strong. It's something that is really powerful. B or Bet for the house. So the strength of the house, or the A and the B, the Ab, means father, which is where we get our word Abba. So all of these words are connected to all sorts of crazy, amazing things. And technology, in some ways, the development of this particular language reflects a little bit of how people have understood and worked in the world. If you read some ancient writing, you can't read it from right to left or right to left to right only. You have to read it in this particular pattern. Why? Because how did you plow a field? You plowed in one direction, you turned around and plowed in the other direction. And so the language itself is even a reflection of how we have interacted in this world. Now, what's fascinating about this is language and writing and literacy has gone through a whole host of developments, and then this thing comes along, which radically transforms everything, which is Gutenberg's press. Gutenberg, by the way, didn't invent the press. It was the Chinese. Yay, go Asians. Gutenberg... Got to give props. What Gutenberg did do is he invented the movable type. Now, language prior to, and I'm speeding by this really quickly, language originally was this wonderful, mysterious, dynamic way of communicating ideas. But the technology of the press, which some people say is perhaps one of the greatest technologies that has radically transformed humanity, changed language and ideas and relationships and theologies and perceptions and mysteries from being all of those things to now being linear, sequential, and uniform. Why? Because the language itself, in order for it to work and in order for it to be read, works in that particular way. Gutenberg's press is uniform. Every copy is the same. So what does that mean? And I'm speeding by this really fast, I know. What that means is, prior to Gutenberg's press, in an oral culture, there's a very fluid relationship between you and I. But after Gutenberg, relationships become very static. Truth becomes static. It becomes, put your stake in the ground. This is what is true. Communities go from being tribal to being individual. You shift from wanting to be about, in fact, if you go to certain tribes, even to this day, and missionaries do this, they ask, if you want to convert and become Christians, the chief or the person will often go back to the community, and it won't be me personally, it will be we all have converted together. Things shift from tribal to individual. Things shift from mystical to being rational. The idea that there's some mystery involved, which is being kind of reclaimed nowadays, to rational, things that must be logical and set in place. And from concrete to being abstract. And the effect of Gutenberg's press essentially is this, is the Reformation. The Reformation, some would say, and I think I would concur with this, would never have happened had it not been for the technology that preceded it. The sermon then takes center stage. Why? Because it's not about tribal, mystical, fluid relationships. It's about static, rational, abstract concepts and ideas. So you need one person to communicate that. And then you have denominations that come because if I'm right, then you're wrong, et cetera, et cetera. The pew, fascinatingly enough in churches, never developed in the church until after 1452. Why? Because what is a pew except linear, sequential, and uniform? And if you sit in that pew, you better be linear, sequential, and uniform, because this is now how the practice happens. Neil Postman mentions that Luther understood as Gutenberg did not, that the mass-produced book, by placing the Word of God on every kitchen table, makes every Christian his own theologian. One might even say his own priest, or better, from Luther's point of view, his own pope. It shifts from tribal to this individual sense, or this sense that now I can own this myself. In the struggle between unity and diversity of religious belief, the press favored the latter, and we can assume that this possibility never occurred to Gutenberg. Now, I've given you a really quick synopsis of this. The technology itself changes and shifts our thinking. And so when this happens, and I'm going to scream through this very, very quickly, when this happens, it shifts again. The Bible that you read on this device, I propose and suggest, is actually a different kind of a document than if you read it in a book. Because what this is now doing is accelerating all of the shifts to privacy, self-sufficiency, simultaneity, and autonomy. It's taking something that you and I once understood as to being this collective thing in a book to now being much more private. And, part of the reason why we're hearing so much about privacy is because it's not because the technology is violating our privacy, it's because the technology is creating our privacy. That's the key shift. I'm going to scream. Sorry. Different ways of thinking about, in an oral culture, you would say God is a rock. In a literate culture, you would say God is omnipotent. And in this information and digital age, you would say God is intelligence. And faith is faithfulness, shifts to belief, an abstract concept and an idea. But faith now, in our culture, is an experience. It's whatever it is that I personally, privately own. And everything is shifting rapidly. And this is what I suggest is something that we should understand in order to engage with what's going on in our world. And it's getting even worse because all of our languages are now shifting away from languages to images. And that creates a whole other shift. Marshall McLuhan said it this way: the medium is the message, one of his most famous quotes. But he said two other things that I think are important and helpful for us. He said, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. The technology is doing something to us. We become what we behold. Sherry Turkle in her book and in her TED Talk said this. And what I found is that our little devices, those little devices in our pockets, are so psychologically powerful that they don't only change what we do, they change who we are. And this is the conversation starter. Last thing. Several years ago, I attended a conference entitled Church Services for Postmodern Generations because the church was kind of wrestling with this and trying to figure out what is really going on in the world and how do we... One of the quotes was this: our message cannot be compromised, but our methods must be culturally contextualized. The authority of Scripture, not sociology. And I remember hearing that and kind of agreeing. Yes, we must never change. We must be static. We must be rational. This must be the same. And then I started reading and learning and thinking and questioning and asking the question. And this statement itself could never have been even said prior to a literary Gutenberg culture. The statement itself is a product of the technology. So all I'm simply proposing to us is that we need to think deeply about what our technologies are doing to us, and this is the beginning of the question.